Well, welcome everybody to Chinwag Nation, episode number 8. This is the third part of our overarching series on the cultural web model, morale, and we'll close it out with tying it all together. A little bit of housekeeping. I'm sorry. We're focused on rituals and routines, the function of the cultural web model on rituals and routines. Um, and speaking of rituals and routines, let's get into a little bit of housekeeping for our episode. These are our opinions. They don't represent past, current, or future organizations. This is Stephen and I just having a good conversation um, about leadership and culture and just hard stuff that sometimes isn't always easy to wrap your head around. And hopefully, our combined experience, can provide some clarity, provide some steps for you to kind of move forward and consider how you might be leading and how you might go forward in that space. Speaking of my own rituals and routines, something I've challenged myself with is learning something new in the social media live streaming space every week. Just one thing. And so if you've been attending our lives consistently, you'll notice a couple of things. One, we have a little ticker on the bottom. And so just to remind us and remind you of like what it is, why we started this thing, why we put it together, and that's to inspire a lasting leadership community. We want communities. We want to connect with you. We want people to connect with one another and learn from one another, and that's really why we created the space. And probably the one and only time, it'll be very rare, but shameless plug, if you have YouTube or Facebook or TikTok, it's just exhausting. I don't know if anybody's played in this space, but there's a lot of spaces where you can go live and message and those types of things. But if you look for at Third Place Leader, give us a like, a share, a follow. It'd be super cool. And then the last thing, as we have a merchandise page, I'll put this in the chat after the session. Our goal is that's the that's our newest mug, but our goal is to not profit at all. Actually, we got some dividends. Steven got some hoodies. My family got some hoodies, and we're going to be donating that to a couple of nonprofits that are important to us, and specifically those that have a job search program, because it's not easy to get a job right now, and so we want to make sure that we're supporting that as well. But let's get into it. So we're talking about rituals and routines. It's a called out section of the cultural web model, and it's not the exact verbiage in what we did in our write up that you shared out, Stephen, but basically, what I wrote down is a culture practice is a culture lived. You said something different in your write up that I put in the post, but I don't know if you remember exactly what that was. I can look it up while you're trying to remember. But what does that like? What does that mean to you? What does that convey to you in terms of this subject we're talking about today?
Yeah, I think I'm going to oversimplify it because I think it makes sense in this way, right? And that's that culture is something that becomes habitual, right? Habits, rituals, routines.
Yeah.
And I think about what's known about habits, right? I think they say that it takes about 21 days, 3 weeks to really form
Yeah,
a habit,
I think it's
right?
21 days is what you'll find out there.
And even beyond that, right? There's a difference between initiative and motivation, and then discipline, right? So like initiative and motivation, like that can get you started. That can get you excited about maybe a cultural change, maybe a new habit. But then it takes significant discipline to keep showing up every single day for those 21 days and beyond to actually form that habit, form that ritual and that routine. And I bring that up because I think it's important to sometimes just think of these things super simply in the sense of how do we implement something uh, to change, right? It's not just you go to an all staff and you say, hey, this is what we're going to do. It's a practice ritual, it's a practice routine, it's doing it constantly, having the discipline to do it constantly. And then, especially when things challenge that ritual or that routine, remembering why it's in place and continuing forward.
Well, I mean, I think there's a certain aspect to that as well, in terms of like it becomes a comfort.
Mhm.
And there is a time to disrupt rituals and routines, right? Especially
Yep.
when if they don't provide value anymore. I know I can spend a nice, solid, good chunk of my day in meetings, and they're important, right? They're important for sure. But is there other ways, right? Is there other rituals and routines in terms of um, that we can think about and to build disruption so that we don't become a kind of status quo?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just you mentioning the meetings, right? Like very similar visceral reaction to that. And I think one of the first things you need to do when you're trying to establish a new routine is block that time off on your calendar. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
untouchable time.
untouchable time, right? Show it out of office if you have to. Um, I remember one of the most valuable routines that I established for myself, that I've continued on from job to job to job, is what I call my Q2 planning time. And that stands for quadrant two. For those that aren't in the lean continuous improvement space, there's this chart called the pick chart. And
Or
it,
the Eisenhower matrix.
yeah, yeah,
Yes.
where you kind of prioritize things by feasibility and by impact. And based off of that, you can prioritize what is the low hanging fruit, right? The things that are easy to do, that are high impact, the challenges, the possibilities, and the things that you shouldn't focus on at all. And so every Monday morning before my first meeting, I have 15 minutes set aside for myself to do what I call Q2 planning. And I think about all the things that's on my board, all the things that's on my to do list, right? And I look and I assess what's the most impactful, what's the most feasible, and prioritize that for that week, making sure that we, kind of have that North Star for the week.
When,
And that has
when
always been an incredibly productive routine for me.
when we worked together, how many Brian stickies did you have in Q2?
Um, I mean, when you say Brian Stickies, I think
You think
you were
Q4?
my direct report, and I gave you lots of delegated authority to do your own things. But I
No,
think
man.
to that end, though, I think you remember I had a Kanban board
I
in
do
my
remember that. Yeah.
office, and all of my senior managers, if you will, had a whole row and dedicated to their own section of the Kanban, and that each senior manager oftentimes had dozens of different things in the hopper.
Yeah.
And so very similar, I would go through not only my own stuff, but what are my staff working on, and just
Sure.
help prioritize.
Well, I mean, so we with this cultural web model, right? And this idea of measuring the immeasurable. This is really what we're trying to wrap our head around, and why we're doing this series. There are different ways for us to measure culture, right? We started off with just kind of walking through every section in our first episode. This last session, we talked about stories,
Mm-hmm.
right? And really the impact on stories on your culture, and using them as a way to measure, really, are you where you want to be as it relates to the stories that are being told. And within this space, rituals and routines, I think there's a similar reflection, right? Really taking it taking an inventory of what it is you're doing day in and day out, and what you're practicing. And I'm hearing one way to do that is to look at your planning, right? What is your planning ritual? What is your planning routine? And is it moving you forward, right? Or is it just kind of a thing just to do a thing? I think another area of rituals and routines is communication.
Yep.
I remember whenever I start a new job, one of the first things I do is I meet with my boss and say, like, how do you communicate? I mean, I think that's vital, because if I don't understand how my boss communicates, then right, that sender receiver dynamic is going to be constantly broken, and we're just going to be missing each other. And so that's one of the first things that I do. And I obviously pay attention, right, with the people that are under my care, and those that I work with and those that I collaborate with as well. Like, hey, how do they communicate? How do they like to? Oh, I delivered something that I could tell non-verbally that I might need to check in with that person. But communication is huge. I One of my biggest projects was leading an agency-wide assessment of how the organization onboarded new employees. And one of the things that we tested out was this idea of a team charter. I was actually in preparing for this, I was thinking about that tool and why we did it, right? And every team charter had like, what is this team? What are they for? What's the primary work that they do? Who are the primary teams that they collaborate with? But even more importantly, on the bottom, at the very bottom, it said like, what are the communication tools we use? And who do we communicate with on a regular basis? And that helped new employees come into the space, understanding like the lay of the land. Like, okay, this is the world that I'm entering, and these are the pathways to get me what I need. I haven't done a team charter in a long time, but I remember doing those, and they were really valuable.
Yeah, I could see that. Especially because I think at some point we're going to talk about symbols, right?
Yeah.
And if somebody has a documented charter that speaks to exactly the work that people are doing and their role within an organization, and that can be pretty empowering. A lot of times people don't see themselves in any type of plan or strategic plan, and I think it's just important to be able to tie things back to why are you here.
Yeah, my light just went out.
Oh, it's okay. You kind of went red there.
I
Still
was like,
stuck on this.
why I'm looking really mad right now, but I'm not.
I mean, I'm still pondering this concept of you talking to your bosses about how they prefer to communicate. Did you ever ask me that?
No, it's pretty easy to figure that out. I didn't have to ask you, Stephen. I think you just told me. I mean, not like an autocratic, right? Push you, but you're pretty straight up, right? It's pretty straightforward. Didn't have to guess, but it's, if I don't know, right? If it isn't offered right away, it's something I definitely try to figure out, right?
It's just funny for those that don't know. Brian and I have very different communication styles, or preferences, I should say. We communicate well with one another, but we have.
Yeah, but I meet you where you're at, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and vice versa. So thinking about rituals and routines, and thinking about really what we're trying to do here in terms of building community, doing hard stuff together. Have there ever been routines that you've struggled with in the workplace, and why? And like, how did you overcome that?
One that immediately pops into my mind, because you brought it up earlier, is just how communication and process will tie to meetings, right? And Brian, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but like a meeting about a meeting, or
What now?
a meeting about a meeting, where you would know a meeting is coming up, and so then you have a planning meeting for that meeting, and sometimes a pre-planning meeting for that meeting.
I think I've had meetings to plan
the pre-planning.
Yeah, the
pre-planning.
Yes.
and
you leave with a plan for the next meeting to plan the thing.
And sometimes, to your point, right, like communication, and how communication should be sort of standardized across the organization. Like, so much time and resources can be buried in meetings, especially non-productive meetings. And I think about leaders that I've worked with in the past that wouldn't come to a meeting unless there was an agenda. And what sounds like a really simple concept and maybe a little bit high maintenance is, in reality, incredibly impactful. If you sit down and you've got a structure to exactly what it is that you're going to talk about and what the desired outcomes are and the needs, and then follow that up with action items, like, then you're using that time in a way that I feel like you're getting something out of it. But if you just get together and you're talking and you don't have any viable outcome from that, that becomes a resource drain really quick.
I know we teed this up last time, but in a future series, we're gonna break down some lean and continuous improvement, Six Sigma stuff. Won't get too complicated, but we're definitely gonna lean into that space. I remember when I in my early lean journey, they used to call it the lean journey. My early lean journey, they talked about the importance of the who, what, when, right? Mm-hmm. And you should always leave a meeting with the who, the what, and the when.
Yeah.
But all these things matter, I think, as it relates to culture, and who you want to attract, right, as an employee, to your organization, or who you want to attract to your team. And I know we touched on this a little bit in our notes, and the habits that you want to develop, because what is it? You talked about this earlier. It takes 21 days to develop habits. I think the rituals and routines reinforce that. And there's a certain aspect that we don't have in our notes, but I think it's important to talk about, and that's like when it comes to habit development. Right? That's the idea of rewarding the rituals and routines. And rewards come in many different shapes and forms, and they're definitely people dependent. But what are your thoughts on that?
I was just thinking, as you were talking, Brian, just the difference of routines and the stories that get told now post COVID versus pre COVID. Because one ritual I was thinking of was if there was senior leadership or above that would immediately come in, go to their office, close the door.
Sure.
And if the door stayed closed throughout the day, what message are you sending, and then what stories are being told?
That's definitely a symbolism and a ritual and routine at the same time, right?
Yeah. And nowadays, I wonder, I think sometimes some of those healthy, visible rituals that we would have, especially around communication and people, it's hard in a virtual workplace if you're not going into the office. And I'm guilty of this too. Working in kind of a consulting type role where I've got multiple laptops, so my Teams message will show me sort of away from my computer all the time with a response saying, "Hey, I might be on my client laptop and may not respond right away." And on my client laptop, it says, "Hey, I might be on my company's laptop. I might not respond right away." And so you're engaged, but you're also not connected.
Yeah,
the way that you used to be.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty, I think, important thing to consider, especially as it relates to this subject, right? Rituals and routines. There's some shift in that space from this kind of full buying a fully remote. Now there's kind of a hybrid space, and then there are some organizations, right, that are saying, "Hey, come back in," right?
Yeah.
And it all has impact. I think it all speaks to the organization and the people, right, that we're seeking, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. And I think this is a debate that probably matters to leaders out there. Cameras on or cameras off?
Oh, the reason I groan is because I am an introvert.
Okay.
And there's so much psychological safety in cameras off. I can slouch in my seat, I can put my feet up on my desk, I can still actively
do it live every week, man.
Yeah, I can actively participate in probably not the most professional way of showing up, but I will say, if a senior leader of a particular meeting, and I say senior leader as in whatever level is, either at the second top or the top of that meeting, if they show up and they turn on their camera, I'm amazed at the trickle down effect of that. Sure. And how people then show up. And then I will say that when cameras are on, people are much more actively engaged.
I attended a training, a couple months ago, maybe it was 3 months ago, where the instructor said, "Hey, I get, you don't have to be camera on. I understand the fatigue that comes with that, and it's not expected of you in this training." And then there's this whole subject around neurodivergent folks, right? And the need to not have the camera on all the time. It actually is challenging for them. So I think there's a lot to consider in this space as it relates to rituals and routines. It's not as simple as it comes across. Like I remember writing this and I'm like, oh, that sounds really kind of just simple, but it's really not a simple subject, right? You have to consider what you want to grow and foster as an organization, right? Those habits that you want people to develop, whether it's problem solving skills, how you structure meetings, right? Or kindness and empathy, right? The words that we use and the way we model, and the way that we communicate. And then just, individual characteristics and how we design for meeting people where they're at and where we or we have flex. I remember in the lean world, when we were coaching people, right? People get excited about standardization, and we're like, hold on, and I fall victim to this too. But we're like, hold on, like we don't have to standardize everything, right? What absolutely needs to be standardized, and where is there some flex? And I think that's the same with rituals and routines. I think there has to be a little bit of flex, and then there's some things where there isn't a lot of flex because like that's a habit that's connected to something where you have to manage risk, right? As an example.
And this is making me think of somewhat of a tangent, but still relevant. In a post-COVID world, there's this concept of the ripple effect that somebody can have in leadership, right? It starts with yourself,
Sure.
and then those closest to you, and then those further out until ultimately your community and the rest of the world. And I know one of the main reasons I don't like to come on camera a lot of times is because my self-care routines that were there before COVID of wake up, get myself showered, throw on a suit, go into the office, right?
Sure.
And have that like structured routine to where now it's like sometimes I brush my teeth and get out of my pajamas, but a lot of times I'm still in my pajamas and then I'm at work. Right? It's like it's a 7-minute routine, and it's quick, it's efficient, it's lovely, but I'm not showing up the most professional way, visibly, by any means. And um, it just makes me want to like throw out a little public service announcement that I think it's really important, especially if you're in a fully virtual world, to make sure that you're still finding ways to prioritize yourself and your self-care. This is going to impact how you show up at work, and that's going to show up how you impact, or it's going to impact how you show up in all your different relationships, professional and personal.
No, I think there's an absolute connection, right, between self-care outside of the organization, how it presents itself, how it works itself into your org. Right. That's why you see like these really successful CEOs and organization heads. They have a pretty disciplined exercise routine, right, before work and after work, because they know it releases stress.
Yeah.
And it makes them, more balanced. And so I think it's a tangent, but I think it's definitely connected. And I think everybody, whoever is listening or who may listen later, can relate to, showing up with a nice dress shirt on top and, your sweats on the bottom.
Yeah, it's happened.
It's happened, right? Or swim trunks or whatever, swim trunks and flip flops. That's why those videos, do so well, because people
Oh
can
yeah,
relate.
it's always my dog or my kids that like barge in, and then I have to stand up to go address it, and then I'm busted. There's my pajama pants.
I think what you just shared, right, I think is important in terms of just making sure that if you're rolling out a new ritual and routine, right, you're saying, hey, we're going to shift how we do meetings, or we're going to shift how we look at things. There has to be safety, I think, in I don't know, psychological safety in kind of ensuring that your people want to go along with you, right? There has to be certain things in place. I think we talked about this last time, relationships and the importance of relationships. But I think if you're rolling out something new and you want it to sustain, there has to be psychological safety in place. And I don't know about you, but I think about that piece, right, as it relates to the organization. And have you ever, when you were in a leadership space, like what were your routines that you implemented that contributed to psychological safety?
Oh, it's a good question, because Brian knows this about me, but I'm a very honest communicator. So when it comes to developing political capital, it's not necessarily one of my strong suits. And for me, I think I have a higher risk tolerance for those types of conversations, because it's just my integrity and sort of my creed, and that's how I align myself professionally. Um, but there are some things that I've done in the past that I'm not actively practicing now, but really should. And I just say that to be human. and one of which was the self care routine. It's part of my day, because if I kind of take care of myself, and I know that there's a little bit of religious aspect to third place leadership, but I put on my God armor. Going out there in the day, I have a little bit of a better defense mechanism, a little bit better of a psychological foundation to be less reactive. Another thing I like to do as well is make sure that you've got safe a safe community, whether that's through an executive mentor, professional coach, or counselor, um, close friends, but a place to be able to bounce ideas off of, and also get your feelings validated. I think sometimes is really important. And the other is to not be afraid to say things like "I don't know" or "I need to take a moment to think about this," and then come back to a particular situation, especially if you're feeling reactive. Um, and you want to be able to approach something very sound, logically. Think about how much empathy and sympathy can you put towards where the other person is coming from, and are the things that they're saying um, really a reflection on the process at hand, or is it a reflection on you and maybe your own insecurities? Like, where is this feeling coming from?
Sure.
And just impacts how you show up. And I think another thing to promote psychological safety as well is that when things don't go as planned, or maybe you don't have a super great interaction, repairing after that rupture, and I think a lot of times people respect vulnerability, and they respect authenticity and somebody being human. And we've all had our moments, right? But if they know that your intent is not to cause harm, and you care a lot about what it is that you're doing, and people see the human side of you, it creates a better trust network in which psychological safety can be there when you're having tough conversations.
No,
What
that's
about,
fair, man. I
what
think
about you?
I think that last one for sure resonates with me. I think there's definitely a self awareness aspect, and maybe even empathy aspect to actually be able to do that, which can be learned, right, and can be practiced. The last thing I think before we kind of close out and end our time, which I know is a key part of the cultural web model, and that's just like this idea of evaluations and performance evaluations, and really kind of how to structure that. I think not I think I know it's a vital routine for organizations as it relates to not only managing their workforce, but giving people the opportunity to get better. And there's lots of different things that I think speak to this, right? There's the fail forward concept. There's your traditional performance review. Every year you get an annual review. And then there's some organizations that say, like, that's no longer part of our ritual and routine. We don't do performance evaluations. We just do real-time feedback. So, I mean, first off, what's your preference? If you have any. I mean, I think you're a pretty flexible guy. You'll just go with whatever the organization wants to build out and then make it better. And then, just your thoughts for folks. I mean, I think if folks have any takeaway from this conversation today, fundamentally focusing on your feedback loop with your people and being consistent is probably the most important, right, aspect of in terms of a ritual and routine in your organization. So that's why we're closing with it. That's why we're calling it out, and that's why we want to kind of dig into it before we wrap up.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a mix of all of it. I never thought about performance evaluations being somewhat antiquated, but I can see that. Just the traditional process of a
What
performance,
about it?
just because we do have other mechanisms now, like real time feedback, right? But I think what's important to understand about evaluations is, to your point, Brian, like, it's a dedicated time to do expectation settings, coaching, and mentoring. And when I mentor other leaders, I always tell them, if you should always not treat performance evaluations as a formality. It's a really good opportunity to help people grow. When you sit down for those performance evaluations and you're giving that feedback, I think it's equally as important that you're receiving feedback from those peers as to what you can do as their leader to support them and where they want to go, and make sure that that gets written down, so that way they can hold you accountable as their leader. But I think I tell leaders this all the time. Nothing on your performance evaluation should catch you off guard.
Sure.
So I believe in
I've seen
real
that
time.
happen, by the way.
Yeah, yeah,
Not
and nobody.
recently, way, way, way back in the day.
Yeah,
But we had an evaluation process where we just didn't bring people along right along the way, and
I mean,
they were surprised, right? And
yeah,
that's not a good, folks. That's not a good ritual and routine. But I've seen it
definitely.
happen.
And you should be dedicating the time to coach and mentor staff, especially if they're not meeting expectations. I think there's a responsibility on the leader as well.
They should be given the
Yeah,
chance, right,
yeah,
to make things better. Yeah,
yeah.
100%.
Kind of coach them through that if you can. And I do like the concept of a formal performance evaluation in the sense that there's set dedicated time to give respect to something that I think is really important. But those conversations should be happening all the time. I don't think it's very healthy or productive to be working in an environment where you don't know what's expected of you and you don't know how you're performing per your leadership's expectations, as well as those that report directly to you. I think it's important to get evaluated by them as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, ideally, there's enough trust in the space to really kind of foster those types of conversations, right? And that nice. There is no product placement in the production of this video.
You just gave it to me as a gift, so I can't help myself. Very excited about it.
It's funny. Yeah, no, I think about I think about what we're talking about with this whole series, measuring the immeasurable, and the immeasurable aspects of an organization like morale and sometimes culture and feelings and just a vibe, right? And I think I know that if you dedicate time in the space, you can positive, and you do it right with people, not to them. You can absolutely increase morale. You can absolutely improve your culture, right? You can absolutely create an environment people want to show up to work because they feel like they have control over their destiny, right? Versus somebody else having control over it. That means something. And I remember tying back to that onboarding project that I was working on. It impacted over 2,000 people. It was a big body of work, and so we were researching best practice, and we were looking at like what does a great onboarding program look like, and what do you want to do in the first 2 weeks, in the first 30 days, in the first 60 days, in the first 90, and it all centered around this idea. Hey, there's my lovely, beautiful, amazing wife. Hey, Johanna, thanks for joining us. Um, they see, now I'm distracted. No, they they really focused on this idea of, hey, within the first couple of weeks, let them get to know their people, spend time with their people. 30 days walk through Within the first 30 days, walk through their performance, or their position description, and then give them some time to settle in and learn the job, right?
Yeah,
Like over the next 90 days, like, hey, learn what your job is, what you're supposed to do. Let's work through that. Let's schedule time during our one-to-ones to walk through that. And then at the 6-month mark, you really start setting goals,
yeah,
right? And that's when you kind of you move forward from there. But I think there's definitely a way to set up some structure around how you evaluate performance, and it's a vital ritual and routine that you can measure. Like, so measurement 101, start with a little piece of paper and start tracking like little tick marks, right? That's a great way to start measuring. So is a stopwatch. One of my former coworkers used to carry around a stopwatch and do like real-time time studies.
that's awesome.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it was pretty cool. I mean, that's sometimes getting the measurements really hard. Like, how do I measure? Tick marks on a piece of paper and it's in a stopwatch are great ways to start. But I mean, I think you can kind of go through like, hey, who's doing performance evaluations? How are they doing them? What's working, what's not working, and And if you don't do those, or you can't find time to do them, we highly recommend that's a ritual and routine that you lean into sooner than later, because it is kind of foundational and fundamental, right, to an organization.
Yeah, I think, I'd love to challenge the third place leadership community on trying to create a new routine for themselves. Whether that's wake up a half hour earlier, take that shower, put on a nice shirt,
Yeah,
put on a tie. Because Brian, I remember you doing that at one point. You were like, I'm gonna wake up and I'm actually gonna get like formally dressed every day. And
I've been doing that more and more, and
yeah,
I got to tell you, I feel better
yeah.
because of that.
Or for those, one thing that made a big difference in my productivity is during my work hours, especially when I'm working virtually. I have my iPhone automatically do the screen time thing, and it turns off all of my social media apps during the workday. And I was amazed that like first week how often I just not even thinking would like click on those apps and it'd be like, sorry, you can't open it yet unless you want to ignore it, right? And
I love that.
that made a big change in my productivity as well. And what I would encourage folks to do is when they think about what routine they want to establish, sort of baseline how you're feeling or whatever it is that you're expecting to change, and measure that over time. Think about, reflect on how
And
it's changed and celebrate as it changes.
exactly, and reward yourself.
Yeah.
There's a book out there called The Power of Habit. There's also Atomic Habit. There's lots of habit books, but those are the two. If you haven't read them yet, Atomic Habit, Power of Habit. But they basically say, right, to reinforce a ritual routine, you want to reward yourself.
Yeah.
And you want to attach a new reward, right, to your routine. So a good example, if you set your alarm to wake up in the morning and you hit snooze, what's your reward?
A little bit more sleep.
A little bit more sleep, right? So therefore you continue to hit snooze. I'm That's real for me to this day. However, if you set your alarm and you get up and you take a shower, right, what's your reward?
Yeah.
Right, renewed and refreshed. So I think there's a certain aspect of making sure that you reward, in a different way towards the habit, right, that you want to build. And I think that I think the same goes for organizations. You want to reward, right, the things and the habits that you want to sustain, and vice versa, right? If you know it's a habit and a ritual and routine that's bringing your organization down. A good example of this is trauma work, right? In a lot of trauma environments, when people get off the phone, they say, "Oh, that was really rough," right? "Oh, that customer was horrible," right? Especially in those harder to work customer environments. And I've seen organizations shift that, right, to say, like, to respond more empathetically, like, "Hey, gosh, that customer's going through a really hard time," right? And really kind of shift the ritual and routine post the phone call. And so, like, what rituals, what routines, what habits are in place now? And to your point, Stephen, how do you want to change them? What are you rewarding without realizing you're rewarding it? I think we wrote this up in the launch for this session, and that's who speaks first in the meeting. And if it's the person in power, I think this goes without saying, but if the person in power is the one who speaks first in the meeting, typically the people are going to not speak up a whole lot, right? Because they're trained just to listen, not participate in the discussion. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot to consider, a lot of ways to measure rituals and routines, especially as it relates to culture. And yeah, if you have any questions, we're going to be wrapping up. We usually reserve the last 5 minutes or so for Q&A. So if you have any questions, pop them in chat. We'll hang out for a couple more minutes with you. Friendly reminder, if you're on the socials, like, follow us. And then we'll pop a merch link in chat. We're going to be donating all the money to nonprofits that have job search programs, because it's tough out there right now for folks, and we want to make sure that we're doing our part in helping our community. So any questions, though? Any thoughts, questions, reflections from our time today? And then we'll wrap up.
I don't know if we're gonna get any questions, but while those pop in, just a reminder, we're going to take, what is it, next week off?
Oh yeah. So we're going to take actually the next. Thank you. That was one housekeeping item I did not cover earlier. But we're going to take the next 2 weeks off. So we will not have an episode. Let's see, pull my calendar up here. We will not have an episode the week of this full week and through all of next week. It's a holiday week as well, and then we'll come back the week of the July 7th. And so, taking a little break, doing some housekeeping, doing some reorganization, and giving some space for us just to kind of do some look backs and do some lesson learns and make some adjustments. So,
and in the spirit of continuous improvement, if you listen to these or if you participate in lives, please feel free to message us and give us feedback, both positive or constructive. And then if there are things that you want to know about, let us know. We're actively planning multiple episodes out. We've got these arcs that we're trying to go through, but we want to make sure that the time that you spend with us is valuable for you.
Love that, Stephen. Thank you. Yes, please give us feedback. Please let us know how we're doing. We would love to get better. So thanks, Stephen, for your time. Thanks for joining us. Have a great